I'm curious, you talked about your mum being a difficult person, and I know that the two of you have had tensions in your relationship,
To say the least.
to say the least. Yeah, and so, and she also had dementia
Towards the end, yes.
towards the end.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious about, yeah, what it's like being in this sort of like intense caregiving relationship with somebody where your relationship has that tension within it. Like, how do you love somebody that you don't like, you know?
That was a line I would always tell myself. I may not like her, but I do love her, and I will do what I need to do for her out of love for her and concern for her well-being. But yeah, it was hard sometimes, especially to go to the nursing home and spend time with her and hear her complain about various things and knowing I couldn't do nothing about it, you know. So, which was really hard, you know. And some of the stuff she complained about was not a complaint at all, right? So,
What's the what is the sort of interiority there? Like, how do you what do you do sort of in your own spirit and your own mind in order to like be present to that person in a good way when, you know, part of you wants to not show up?
yeah. Um, all I could do was the best I could. I, you know, I'm not a person who's very good at acting. I'm, what do they call it, an open book. And I wear my feelings on my sleeve. So it was really hard to go in there. So I probably didn't go in as much as I should have. And there is some guilt about that, you know, she was alone so much. But I couldn't bring myself to do any more than that. And plus I was working here and I was, you know, I had a partner and I had children that were adult children. And so I had a lot of responsibilities. And so she was just another one of them, you know. So we did what we could.
Yeah, I'm curious what's unique about that longer term care commitment.
Well, you're probably going to experience a lot more ups and downs and just a lot more, and a lot of different situations. We had a lot of trips to the hospital. I spent a lot of time in ambulances going, because with Parkinson's, for instance, with my dad, he would get pneumonia and it would be a matter of, you wouldn't see it coming, it just would be like that because it comes from aspirating food into your lungs. And so he would get it very quickly, and so off we would go to the hospital in an ambulance. You know, you spend a lot of time dealing with situations like that, but you know, on average, most people don't do in normal circumstances. You find that your problem solving becomes very good, and that you have no choice but to learn how to solve the problems. Short term, I haven't, well, the only experience I have with short term care is in work, at work, you know, and then I sort of left them behind and came home and did whatever it was I did. So to speak to that, I would assume that you don't have the same time invested. And so when we spend a lot of time with people, you tend to become more emotionally attached and that sort of thing. And certainly with long-term care, there's a lot of emotions up and down, and happy and sad, and you know, it's like a pendulum sometimes. And there's the reward to seeing, but you also have a lot of guilt that I wish I could do more. So that, you know, that's the other aspect of a long-term caring plan.
I'm curious if you'd say a little bit more about that guilt. How do you forgive yourself?
Well, eventually, at some point you have to say, I've done what I can do today. You know, you're human, so you have to think about, there's only so much I can do in a day, and I've done what I can. Does it always work? No. Sometimes you just go to sleep with the guilt, but you're so tired it doesn't matter anyway. So there you go. But, you know, and then there are other times when you just feel, you know, really happy. I did something really great today, and, you know. So that's where the pendulum comes.
And like, how do you have space to unwind and sort of, all of that? Where are the boundaries there when it's your house?
Okay, well, a lot of my social life was outside as opposed to in the house. As far as boundaries, I mean, we had our own rooms and that kind of thing, so that wasn't an issue. And the kitchen, I mean, I was making the meals, so I would be doing it with them anyway, so yeah.
So one of the other interesting things about your story is that you were working while taking care of them. I'm curious about that dynamic. How do you manage work and caring for people, and to what extent does going to work 9 to 5 provide a sort of space outside of that responsibility that is contributes to self-care in some way?
Okay. Well, first of all, it wasn't always 9 to 5, so I was fortunate in that in the later years, which is when both of them were needing the most care, I had flexible hours so that I could adjust my schedule where needed. As far as self-care, first of all, it was a paycheck, which is important because life continues. You still have to pay bills, and you still have all of those things. So, and a lot of people, unfortunately, don't. That's not the situation. They're at home taking care of someone and not collecting a paycheck. I'm not sure how that is managed because that's very difficult. The other thing is that, you know, it maintains your self-esteem. You're producing something. In my case, it was a very social job when I worked in activation because that was the whole point, to be socializing, to set up programs for the seniors so that they were socializing and interacting. So I was interacting with other people, but also with their families. I could be more sympathetic, I think, because of the fact that I was in the same circumstances a lot of they were. We also had an adult day program there as well. So a lot of the people, the family members, were doing exactly what I was doing and taking their families for a relief, for a break in a day program. So I was able to bring my mom to work, actually. So for 5 years I did that. She came 5 days a week to our adult day program, and she loved it. She just loved it, and she was very social, even though she didn't always know who she was being social with.
Yeah, any advice you might have for people looking at taking on some of that long-term caring responsibility?
I think, first of all, you need to know exactly what you're getting into, because I remember seeing an interview on TV, actually, about PSWs in Quebec. They were fast-tracking them. And there was one young man who said, oh, I want to help people. I want to be able to talk with them and that sort of thing. And I'm thinking, I hope he knows that what they're actually having to do is, day-to-day care, and that can mean, changing diapers and that kind of thing. It wasn't just chit-chatting and being a friend to them. I know in my class, for instance, we started out the first year, it was a 3-year course. The first year we had 28 people in the class. By the third year there were 13 people who completed and graduated. So people just aren't always knowing what they're getting into when they're talking about care of, long-term care. Is the person got mobility issues? Do they need feeding? I mean, in my father's case, sometimes dinner would take 2 hours because of course the swallowing issues, and so you had to really take time to feed him. I even did that when he was in long-term care, because I knew that the nurses and the PSWs didn't have 2 hours to feed him. So I would do that on my way home from work. So know what you're getting into. Also, what to expect with declines. They may seem great right now, but down the road, what's going to happen? And so you need to either think about what arrangements are going to need to be made, or are you able to do that? The other thing is know where support is. The healthcare system, in some ways, they can have home care and that sort of thing. Associations will help. For instance, Parkinson's has a lot of support. Alzheimer's supports people with dementia. All of those kinds of things. The assistive devices program was really helpful with both my parents, because they both needed walkers, and eventually my father needed a wheelchair, so they assist with that. And Wheel-Trans, you also need to know, would your person be eligible for Wheel-Trans? A lot of times people assume that with dementia they're going to be able to get on Wheel-Trans, but it's more about mobility issues, unless they've changed that, and I don't believe they have. That kind of thing. The other thing is with family issues, don't try and force people to do what they can't do. I mean, emotionally, some people aren't able to cope with seeing their relative declining, and so to try and force them to do things they can't do. Other people have their own health issues and can't do that. And I mean, that was the case in our family. My sister had diabetes and had a family of her own, and her daughter wasn't well. My younger brother was not able emotionally. He stayed with my mother once and said, I can't do this. He just emotionally was not able to do it. And so you can't force that on people. It just causes friction and anger and upset if you do. And what then happens is that the person that's being cared for is in the middle of it, and they've, it takes away some of their dignity and if you're fighting over who's going to do what for who, so I think that's a point. And if you will need relief, it can be paid or unpaid. So I mean, I had friends who were willing to stay with my mom on occasion. I also had Home Instead come and stay with her when I wanted to go out, and so things like that. But of course, Home Instead, you pay. And if a person doesn't have the finances to do that, then you have to look elsewhere. So there's things like that. And I would say, don't be a martyr. You know, oh, poor me, I have to do this. I mean, I chose to take care of my parents, and so I felt that it was challenging though it was. I felt good about it, and I felt that I wanted to do it. But you know, you do hear about a lot of people saying, oh, well, I have to do this and I have to do that. Make the choices that are best for both the family member and yourself. But you need to keep a sense of humor about things like that. I mean, and you can't get embarrassed by what seems ridiculous, but is not really to them. And I guess that's really all I want to say about, you know, and treat yourself kindly. You need to treat yourself kindly as well.
Well, it was difficult as people I care about were dying off. I mean, you expect it from your parents, especially when they're in their mid-90s, but you don't like it. It's still a very significant loss. And Sue was only 66. Her brother was 48. Sue was only 66 when she died. So kept hoping that she would recover, but she didn't.
Yeah, I'm. One of the things that you mentioned in that is that you were taking care of people who were very slowly, getting older and more dependent,
Right.
and dying, with the sort of like complexities of that, and in the midst of that, dealing with sort of immediate tragedy.
Right.
I'm curious about how those two sets of responsibilities intersect with one another.
Well, certainly with my mother, whose demise was quite slow, and it meant a lot of commitment from me going out there, helping my father. Certainly that was difficult. That was difficult in terms of the time commitment. Had to make that a priority. Now I would do it again if I had to, certainly, but it still is a long, slow commitment. Whereas with my father, it was with my father. It was a relatively short time. I could see him going downhill. Had to spend a lot of time making sure that he was looked after well, whether he was in the hospital or whether he was at home. And knowing not only that he was dying, but he was dying soon, that he would be gone almost immediately, which he was.
How did taking care of Sue differ from taking care of your parents?
Certainly the age difference. My parents were in their mid-90s when they died. My father was 97. Certainly you know that they're not going to be alive too much longer. With Sue, very close friend like that, and you think that might have a life together, and that was not to be the case.
Yeah, so it sort of, you've got some expectations about a future, and we've got narratives about our parents dying.
Right.
But we don't have narratives for how to grapple with a loved one dying.
Yeah, it's certainly difficult. You keep hoping that she was going to get better, and there was a possibility that she could. But she was getting one complication of diabetes after another, heart, kidneys, and you came to realize at a point that no, she would not be either with us or in very, very good shape. And it was very frustrating. You wondered if what's going to happen to her? Is she going to die? And it became very obvious in the last few months that she didn't have a lot of time left.
What's it like navigating that, that hope, shifting, dissipating, rekindling?
Yeah.
How do you manage that in sort of inside of yourself?
It wasn't easy. Sometimes I felt fairly optimistic. Other times I felt miserable. That this was something where there were expectations of a lifelong relationship, and well, it was a lifelong relationship for Sue, but not in the sense that I meant.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. I really appreciate you sharing that.
All right.
Yeah. I'm also curious, like, how did the differences between your relationship with her and the relationship with your folks, like, impact what that caregiving relationship looked like? How did it change the way that you would have conversations with her, for example, or the way that you sort of like participated in decision making?
Well, a lot of conversations were did relate to the illness. I was mostly, well, for both parents and Sue, I listened, tried to work with them if there's a question, to work with them to decide what they're going to do. But sorry. It's hard to put down in so many words how they differed, although they did. Certainly it goes back to the feeling that with my parents, conversations often focused around helping them adapt, helping them be comfortable, especially for my mother, although my father was capable of making his own decisions almost until he died. And questions of whether, when I visited him, whether we'd go down to the lake or watch the soccer game. He's English, so he likes the soccer. With Sue, it was really listening to her planning what she wanted to do in terms of her medical care and what the risks were of her illness on her life.
Yeah, I hear you. Thank you. Yeah. It sounds like what I hear you saying is sort of some of the conversations with your parents were more focused on just ensuring they were comfortable, whereas with Sue, it was, is it possible that you would get better?
Yeah. With my parents, we did make some decisions about going out and enjoying ourselves, whether it's going into a local restaurant or down to the lake, which my parents did a lot while they were alive and mobile. Whereas with Sue, it was, always I help people make their own decisions, something I've learned from working a helpline for many years.
Both of my parents ended up in a nursing home. They lived up north. We didn't realize quite early enough how much help they needed. And my sister and I did what we could to get them into a home that was a very nice home.
I'm wondering if you'd be willing to talk about the role that your parents' community had as they were finding themselves sort of increasingly dependent.
Our community church, the United Church in South River, was amazing. They told us before we even realized how bad my dad was, because they'd see it. He was the usher every Sunday. And my mother would routinely, every once in a while, just slide out of her seat and end up in the hospital because she had low blood, and they'd pump her up with blood and she'd be fine. But the community was wonderful.
How did they communicate with you?
By phone, or when we were, when we visited as well, of course.
Okay. So they were, they were sort of, they were acting as almost like a little bit of a lookout, it
Yes,
sounds like.
totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. How did you manage caring for both your mum and your dad sort of simultaneously?
Well, my mother fell at Thanksgiving, or broke her hip and then fell, and ended up in hospital, had surgery, and the doctor said she can't go home. So we originally were going to do a hospital-to-hospital transfer, bringing her to Aurelia, close to my sister, and that didn't work out. We had her in a nursing home, an expensive nursing home, for a couple of months, I guess, and then we got her into the home that we really wanted her to be at. And the doctor, sometime during that, called my sister and said, "You've got to get your dad out of here. He shouldn't be on his own." So she took him in until we got him in there as well. So they were both in the same home on different floors.
And what was it like for you, sort of needing to be responsible for your mum, needing to be responsible for your dad?
It wasn't difficult. We just, I went up every second weekend to visit and spend time with them. My sister visited as often as she could. And we were very happy with the place that they were in. They were being well cared for.
You've spoken about them getting separated, but also moving around. I'm curious about why that took place and what the consequences were there.
My mother was in a lot better shape originally than my dad, mental-wise. My dad, by the time we got him in there, was very noticeably had dementia. We found out after he passed away he had Lewy body disease, which is sort of like Alzheimer's, but with a bit of Parkinson's. My mother had noticed my dad quite a while before we did, because his cousin had a woodlot and he used to go out and feed the birds. And she would check her watch when he left, and she was, worried that he would forget how to come home. And I said, you know where he's gone, you know where to send the police if he's not home, which was good. So yeah, that was helpful. And the place they were in was wonderful.
What was wonderful about it? Can you say more about that?
Just the people were great. They took good care of them. My mother ended up having Alzheimer's. She was pretty feisty, and she was tiny. They called at one point to my sister and said, "Can one of you come and help us cut her nails because she's scratching?" And so I took on that job, and I would go up, I'd have my little kit, I'd pull her wheelchair up to the bed and sit down and just clip her nails, and she didn't give me any trouble. At that point, I'm not even sure if she knew who I was, but she knew it was okay for me to do that. And I had to go once and convince her to go in the big bathtub because she wouldn't let them bath her either. So yeah, it was a challenge.
Sure. So yeah, I'm curious, will you say more about them sort of getting moved around, getting separated?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
My mother was on an upper floor. My dad was on the Alzheimer's floor, so his door was locked. My mom was in a room on her own, but the bathroom was in the middle and she shared with someone else, and it got to one point where that was her bathroom and the other lady wasn't allowed in there. So we got her, actually, at that point, we got her moved into the room. It was sort of like a corner room. My dad was over there and my mom was over there. But she didn't really ask to go visit him. The only time she really visited him was when we went, which was very strange. They were married many, many, many years. And my dad was a television person, so when they were at home, Dad always had the television on. She turned it off as soon as he went out the door. And we had a TV in her room. She never wanted it on.
So it sounds like you were sort of like facilitating their ongoing
Yes.
relationship.
Yes, we were.
Tell me more about that.
It was good, and Mom too, because of the Alzheimer's. You know, she was in a walker to begin with, and she was in a wheelchair. Sometimes we go visit, and she'd just take off.
I was asking about you facilitating your mom and dad's relationship when they were in there, in the facility, and yeah, I'm curious about that, and also, yeah, it sounds like your mom wandered off a little bit. I'm curious if you'd be willing to say some stuff about
She
that.
wandered off when she'd had enough. If my sister and I were visiting, well, we'd say, well, I guess we can stay and visit each other, or we can go home. She's gone. We used to always get the two of them together, and so they could visit, or we could visit them together. So yeah.
What are some of the challenges in elder care in the country, in a rural context?
It wasn't too bad actually, because my mom had community care for quite a while, because she had originally broken the other hip. She had a really nice caseworker, and because when she ended up coming home from the hospital after breaking her hip again, the caseworker came down, and I sat the night before and wrote many, many notes and handed them to her when she came in the door. But she was asking them all kinds of questions. They were answering properly, which was good, not in denial. And she also had a cleaning lady that came in. I had, first of all, a friend, and Mom got a little feisty about that. Then I had my cousin, who was doing her cleaning, check and make sure she was taking her medication. So that was, because that was kind of tricky as well.
Okay. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, you've spoken about sort of the work of navigating the unknowns. Would you be willing to say more about that?
We didn't really have a hard time, because we had the hard time was convincing them that they needed to leave the house. And that was sort of facilitated by my mom slid out of the chair at church, ended up in the hospital on a Sunday. Our cottage got hit by lightning on Tuesday and burned to the ground. And when Mom came home, that was when the caseworker came, and so the one thing I want to say is to older people, try not and wait till something happens, that a crisis happens, that you have to move. Do it on your own terms.
Yeah, you had been sort of gently trying to have those conversations.
Well, that Sunday we were getting ready to go in and have a chat.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the universe had a chat for you.
Yes, exactly.
Right. What was the impact of sort of not preemptively making those transitions?
It wasn't really that bad, because when she went to Huntsville Hospital for the surgery, and then there's a little, it's not open anymore, I don't think, a little Red Cross hospital in Berks Falls that they transferred her to. And my sister and I had gone in June, I think. I took a day off work and we went to visit a bunch of nursing homes, so we knew where we wanted and where we didn't want, and we were lucky to get into the nursing home that we really wanted.